The armory at Fort Ironwood was never quiet in the afternoons. Metal clanged, boots thudded, and the smell of oil filled the air as soldiers worked on their weapons. To most, it was just another routine maintenance day. But for one soldier, it was a ritual that demanded every drop of patience and care. Sergeant Victoria Kane sat alone in the far corner, her hands moving slowly but surely across the heavy Barrett .50 caliber rifle stretched before her. She wasn't rushing. She never did. Every pin, every spring, every piece of metal was wiped clean and placed back in perfect order. For Victoria, the Barrett was more than a weapon. It was a part of her, and she treated it with the respect others might give a family heirloom. On the other side of the room, General Marcus Harlan walked in with his aide, Captain Reed Lawson, to carry out his usual inspection. The general's eyes scanned the rows of rifles, the soldiers cleaning them, the discipline of the men and women under his command. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He had done this 100 times before. "Everything looks fine, sir," Lawson murmured, tapping notes into his tablet. But then Harlan's gaze stopped. In the corner, almost hidden behind a rack of M4s, sat the young woman working silently on the massive Barrett. She looked ordinary at first, late 20s, steady hands, slim build, but her movements caught his attention. Each motion was deliberate, controlled as if she had been doing this for years without ever making a mistake. "Carry on, soldier," the general said as he stepped closer, using the usual phrase to keep the moment professional. Victoria looked up only for a second. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, her voice calm and even. Then she went back to her work. Harlan would have walked on, but something on her uniform made him pause. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing at a small badge pinned neatly above her heart. It was plain silver, not flashy, not something a civilian would even notice. But the numbers etched into it stopped him cold. 3,100 meters. Confirmed kill. The general froze. His breath caught in his throat. "What is this?" he muttered. Lawson looked up, confused. "Sir?" Harlan pointed directly at the badge. His voice grew firm. "Soldier, that's impossible. No one has ever made a shot like that." The room seemed to hush around them. A few soldiers nearby glanced over, sensing tension. Victoria raised her head fully now, her dark eyes steady on the general's. "Sir?" she said simply. "The shot was real. It was confirmed by Mission Command and recorded by multiple observers. All the documentation exists, though it's classified." The general studied her face, searching for arrogance, exaggeration, some hint that she was bragging. But there was none. She looked calm, almost too calm for what she had just claimed. "Lawson, pull up her record." Captain Lawson swiped quickly through his tablet, fingers moving fast. When the file opened, his eyes widened. "General, Victoria Kane graduated from Fort Branson Sniper School with the highest scores in her class. She went on to advanced ballistic programs, long-range reconnaissance, and—" He stopped, shaking his head. "There are assignments here linked to units I've never even heard of." The general's jaw tightened. He turned back to Victoria. "Explain it to me. How does anyone make a 3,100-meter shot? That's more than 2 miles. Most snipers struggle past 1,500. Victoria set down the rifle's bolt carrier gently on the bench before her. She looked straight at him, her voice calm but steady. "Sir, such a shot requires more than pulling a trigger. It takes hours of preparation. You account for wind at multiple altitudes, changes in air pressure, temperature, even the Earth's rotation. You wait until the conditions are perfect. You measure again and again until there's no mistake. And then, you don't move. Not for minutes, sometimes not for hours. One breath, one pull. That's how." Harlan felt his throat tighten. He had served in the military for over 25 years. He had seen courage, he had seen discipline, but never had he stood in front of someone claiming to have done the impossible and explaining it as if it were no more than changing a rifle magazine. He turned slowly to Lawson. "Is her record legitimate?" Lawson nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Everything matches. She's been deployed with the 77th Ranger Battalion, attached to Shadow Unit support, and her record is littered with classified missions." The general's mind raced. For years he had believed he understood the limits of human skill in war, but this woman, sitting silently in the corner, was showing him those limits were not real. "Sergeant Kane," he said at last, his tone slower, heavier, "I need to know more about this shot, and I need to know who you really are." Victoria glanced back at the rifle she was still cleaning, then up at the general once more. Her eyes were calm, but behind them was something else. Something unreadable. "With respect, sir," she said softly, "some answers aren't mine to give." The armory grew colder as silence stretched between them. For the first time in a long while, General Harlan felt uncertain. He had stumbled upon something he couldn't yet understand.
2 days later, the morning sun spilled across Fort Ironwood's extended range. Rows of targets stood far in the distance, their white boards barely visible against the desert sand. Soldiers whispered among themselves, excitement and doubt mixing in their voices. Word had spread fast. Sergeant Victoria Kane was about to prove the impossible. General Marcus Harlan stood with his arms folded, eyes sharp, waiting. Beside him, Captain Reed Lawson carried a clipboard, his face tight with curiosity. Harlan had ordered this demonstration not just for himself, but for his staff. If Victoria's badge told the truth, everyone needed to see it. Victoria arrived quietly, carrying the heavy Barrett .50 on her shoulder as if it were no more than a backpack. Her steps were calm, her face unreadable. She laid her rifle down on the shooting mat, then began her slow, methodical setup. The general walked closer. "Sergeant, today you show me what you can do, but our range only goes to 1,200 meters. That's not 3,000. Will that be enough?" Victoria glanced up at him, her expression steady. "Yes, sir. It will show you what matters, the precision, not just the distance." She opened a small case beside her. Inside were tools and devices the other soldiers barely recognized. A wind meter, a small electronic ballistic computer, a laser rangefinder. She handled each with care, checking numbers, adjusting dials. Every move was deliberate, unhurried. The other soldiers shuffled, whispering louder. Some smirked. "She's dragging it out," one muttered. "Anyone can hit 1,200 if you stall long enough." But when Victoria lay flat on her stomach, Barrett pressed into her shoulder. The crowd grew quiet. She slowed her breathing, her chest rising and falling in rhythm. Her finger rested near the trigger, but did not squeeze. "Talk me through it, Sergeant," General Harlan said, crouching nearby. "Yes, sir," she answered calmly. "I'm measuring wind speed at different distances. Air density shifts the bullet over time. At this range, one mistake in calculation could send the shot a yard off target. I can't allow that." She paused, checked her computer again, adjusted her scope. Then her voice lowered. "Ballistic solution complete." The general frowned, intrigued. "Meaning?" "Meaning the bullet knows where it's going, sir." The words were quiet but sharp, and they made Lawson glance up from his clipboard. Then came silence. Victoria's finger tightened. Her breathing slowed until it almost stopped. The rifle roared. The sound shook the air, echoing off the hills. Soldiers flinched. Some even ducked. The recoil slammed back, but Victoria's body absorbed it with steady control. "Target hit, center mass," the range officer shouted, his voice cracking with surprise. General Harlan's binoculars lifted instantly. He saw it with his own eyes, a clean hole punched dead into the chest of the farthest target, almost perfectly centered. The general lowered the binoculars slowly. He looked at Lawson, who was staring at the target in disbelief, then back at Victoria, who had already reloaded, ready for another shot. "Again," Harlan ordered. She didn't argue. Another deep breath, another slow squeeze. Boom. The second round cut through the air, striking within inches of the first. 2 holes, side by side, impossible to doubt. The soldiers who had mocked her stood silent now. Their smirks were gone, replaced with wide eyes. Someone whispered, "She's unreal." Harlan stepped closer. "How long could you hold this position, Sergeant?" Victoria didn't move her eyes from the scope. "Hours, sir, as long as it takes." He studied her, realizing the truth. This wasn't luck, it wasn't chance. This was discipline carved into her bones. Finally, she lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "Sir, this is only 1,200. The shot you asked about, the 3,000, that was different. Harder. I waited 4 hours in the dirt without moving. I tracked the air pressure every 30 minutes. I held still until the target gave me the one opening I needed. If I rushed, people would have died. I couldn't let that happen. The general felt a weight in his chest. For decades he had measured soldiers by medals, ranks, and reports. But this woman had just shown him something else, a level of skill that bent the limits of what was possible. "Lawson," he said, his voice low, "get me her full service record. I don't care what clearance it takes. I need to know everything." Lawson nodded quickly, already typing. The soldiers around them began to murmur again, this time in awe, not doubt. Victoria stayed on the mat, breaking down her rifle with the same calm focus she had shown from the start. For her, the demonstration was finished. She didn't need applause. Harlan stared at her for a long moment. The badge on her chest glinted in the sun. 3,100 meters. Confirmed kill. The general finally understood. This wasn't just a soldier. This was a weapon of her own. And he had only seen the surface.
The office was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. General Marcus Harlan sat behind his desk, his face lit by the glow of classified files scrolling across the secure tablet. For the past week, he had fought through layers of clearance, endless paperwork, and cold stares from higher command. Now the results sat before him, each page more unbelievable than the last. Sergeant Victoria Kane's service record was not a record at all. It was a legend disguised as paperwork. He scrolled through the missions, operations with no names, just code numbers, reports stamped classified, kill confirmations that stretched across continents, not one, not two, but dozens of shots that had changed the outcomes of battles, missions, even entire operations. Harlan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. He had been in the army long enough to know when truth sounded like myth. But this wasn't a myth. This was the woman who had stood calmly in the armory, cleaning her rifle as though she were invisible. The door opened quietly. Captain Reed Lawson stepped in, holding a folder. "Sir, I've got the briefing notes from Washington. They want to speak to you directly." Harlan waved him in. "Put them through." Moments later, the screen flickered and the stern face of General Elaine Porter appeared. Her voice was crisp, steady, leaving no room for argument. "General Harlan, you've been digging into Sergeant Kane's file. I'm here to explain what you've stumbled onto." Harlan sat straighter. "With all due respect, General, I don't stumble. I follow facts. And the facts tell me this sergeant is more than just a soldier." Porter nodded slowly. "You're correct, Sergeant Kane is not a standard operator. She is what we call a strategic asset. Her skills are deployed in missions where failure is not an option. That confirmed 3,100-meter shot, it wasn't just about setting a record. It was the only way to save hostages who were about to be executed. No airstrike, no ground team could reach them in time. She was the answer." Harlan's stomach tightened. "Why wasn't I told about this before?" "Because her work is classified beyond your level," Porter said plainly. "You command a base. She operates on a different field altogether. When you saw her in the armory, you weren't looking at an ordinary sniper. You were looking at someone whose trigger pull has saved more lives than entire battalions." Harlan glanced at Lawson, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. Then he turned back to the screen. "General, with respect, you're telling me we're hiding legends in plain sight." Porter leaned forward. "Not hiding, Harlan. Protecting. Men like you measure war in troops and equipment. But sometimes, one soldier, unseen and unpraised, shifts the balance of an entire conflict. That's what Victoria Kane represents." The call ended. Silence fell heavy in the office. Lawson cleared his throat. "Sir, what now?" Harlan stood, walking slowly toward the window. Outside, the base buzzed with routine drills, trucks moving, soldiers marching, rifles clattering. But his eyes searched past all that, toward the shooting range in the distance. He thought of the badge again, 3,100 meters, confirmed kill. He said, She stays right here. Let her keep cleaning that rifle in the corner where no one notices. Let her remain the ghost no one sees. Because when the day comes, Lawson, when the day comes that we need the impossible, she'll already be ready."
Weeks later, Victoria was gone. No announcement, no farewell, just silence where she had once been. Soldiers whispered that she had been deployed. Others claimed she had vanished into some secret program. The truth lay in classified files locked beyond their reach. But somewhere far beyond Fort Ironwood, Victoria Kane lay flat against the dirt of a foreign mountain, Barrett pressed to her shoulder. Her breathing slowed, her mind sharper than the wind whipping across her cheek. 3 hours had passed. The target hadn't moved. Hostages waited inside a building below, their lives measured in minutes. Her finger tightened. One breath, one squeeze. The bullet left the barrel, carving through distance that most men couldn't even see. Seconds later, the threat was gone. The hostages lived. And Victoria Kane, unknown to the world, had once again changed the outcome of history. Back at Fort Ironwood, General Harlan stood in the armory one evening, watching the corner where she had once sat. The bench was empty now, the silence loud. He turned and walked away, carrying the weight of what he now knew. The greatest warrior he had ever commanded had been the one nobody noticed, until it was too late to forget her.
If you were touched by this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us in sharing good stories that matter. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.